All right, so let's talk about HoneySQL. Unfortunately, uh, unlike other libraries we've gone through, I actually have experience with HoneySQL, so I will try not to jump ahead too much. All right, so HoneySQL, SQL is or SQL, HoneySQL. Which one is it? Is it SQL or is it SQL? No. As Clojure data structures, build queries programmatically even at runtime without having to bash strings together. Yes, very, very good thing. Let's see. I think I'm going to skip over the build stuff. There's a web app. Oh, that's cool.
HoneySQL runs in ClojureScript, so pretty much everything about it will work in ClojureScript. Although why you'd want to be building SQL on the front end, I'm not quite sure, but you can.
Oh, wow. Hmm. Interesting. All right.
We could use this during our exploration.
We'll see. I don't know. Not Vim and a REPL. Let's see. Okay. So there's a legacy. I've never used 1.x, but it was apparently quite widely used.
Yeah, the library's been around for a very long time. And when I initially inherited it, I kept the 1.x stream alive for quite a while. But some of the requests for features were almost impossible to implement in the 1.x architecture. So 2.0 is a complete rewrite of the library from scratch. And that's what's mostly maintained today.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Usage section contains a number of usage examples, but does not deep dive into the way the data structure acts as a DSL that can specify SQL statements as hash maps and SQL expressions and function calls as vectors. Recommend that you read the getting started section of the documentation before trying to use HoneySQL to build your own queries. All right. Sounds like a good place to go. So HoneySQL lets you build complex SQL statements by constructing and composing Clojure data structures, then formatting that into data to an SQL statement string and any parameters it needs. All right, there's your dependencies. Oh, it produces SQL statements, but does not execute them. To execute them, you need a JDBC wrapper like NextJDBC and a JDBC driver for the database you want to use. We can try. Let's try this and see how far we get. SQL statements are represented as hash maps with keys representing clauses in SQL. SQL expressions are generally represented as sequences where the first element identifies the function or operator and the remaining elements of the arguments or operands. HoneySQL format takes the hash map representing an SQL statement and produces a vector suitable for use with NextJDBC or Clojure Java JDBC. It has the generated SQL string as the first element, followed by parameter values in the SQL state. Let's see here. Copy that one. By default, any values found in the data structure that are not keywords or symbols are treated as positional parameters and replaced by a question mark in the SQL string lifted into the vector that is returned from format. Most clauses expect a sequence as their value. Sequence, oh, like this. All right. A sequence has their value containing either a list of SQL entities or the representation of an expression. Some clauses expect a single SQL entity. Few accept a more specialized form, such as set, accepting a hash map of SQL entities and SQL expressions. Oh, like an update statement. SQL entity can be a simple keyword or symbol or a pair that represents an SQL entity and its alias. So like ID as foo. Okay. I wonder if that will copy the right thing. Oh, I got the format in there. There we go. From clause now is a pair that identifies the SQL table entity table and its alias T. Columns can be specified either by their qualified name as a TID or their unqualified name as in name. Select clause here identifies two SQL entities, T.ID and name with the letter alias to item. Symbols can also be used, but you need to quote them to avoid evaluation. Let's see if I can, there we go. Give us a little breathing room. Oh, it's the whole form is quoted. So that, how is that? Oh, it's because it's symbols in here instead of keywords. I see. Let's see if that will work in our.
Is there any reason why you'd want to use symbols instead of keywords?
There are some people who prefer the sort of data log style of query. And if you're writing out a big static chunk of the DSL, then it saves you having to press colon every time, which is, a shift and a character and then the word. So it was asked for early on and I added it, and I do use it myself. There are some times when it just is nicer to, bash out SQL full of parentheses and set of square brackets and symbols instead of keywords, and it's just nicer to look at. I don't know how widely used it really is.
Yeah, I mean, you can.
And I think the reason it works in ClojureScript there in that web page is that symbols and keywords kind of end up being treated very similarly. I'm a little surprised it doesn't need quoting there, but maybe it just reads it as data. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably reads it as data, so it doesn't need the quoting in the ClojureScript about. Yeah, that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, it gets really close to actually being something you can copy and paste.
Mm-hmm.
Except for the extra nesting, but that's interesting. All right, if you wish, you can specify SQL entities as namespace qualified keywords, and the namespace portion will be treated as the table name. Ah, okay. In addition to using, so as SQL expressions, in addition to using hash maps to describe SQL clauses, HoneySQL uses sequences to describe SQL expressions. Any sequence that begins with a keyword is considered to be a kind of function invocation. Certain functions are considered to be special syntax, and have custom rendering. Some functions are considered to be operators. In general, foo will be render as foo. with parameters 42 and C lifted out. We can totally make invalid SQL over here. Oops.
You need an extra level of brackets around it. That's mentioned a little further on, but
I add one in here.
you may be able to replace the entire DSL with just that expression. So if you want to try that,
Like that.
there we go. Format will format an expression as well as a statement.
Oh, just so like a snippet. If you just want, I want just the where.
I don't encourage it because then people create strings and try and stick them into something else. But it is possible.
Where null is null. Or foo equals 1. Huh. So you see the temptation is then to take this and then use string concatenation to continue on.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And we
For
don't
those
want
that
to do
just want to
string
go
bashing.
full circle, right?
Yes.
All right. You can so let's see. We listed it as SQL with a SQL string followed by parameters. You can use the numbered true format option to format to produce SQL that can contain numbered placeholders. So like here, numbered true. Did I spell numbered right? Yes, I did.
And there you go.
Oh,
Foo equals
there we go.
$1.
Huh. Yes, it supports comments. Already better than JSON. As of 2.4.1002. Golly, you got a lot of versions there.
It's the commit.
Oh, okay. There you go. Well, you have a lot of commits then.
Yeah.
Function calls with named arguments are supported with some databases support. Substring can also be written. Oh, interesting. So this is like keyword args or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, look
I
at
hadn't
that.
heard of it until it was requested, and the workaround seemed to be, well, exclamation mark can't be anything else, so let's use it as a keyword in keyword arguments.
Yeah, because you already have keywords. You can't. Yeah. Okay. Cool. And so we should be able to just take this, like you said, and just put it in here. Nice. In a function call, keywords or symbols that begin with a bang followed by a letter treated as inline SQL keywords. So is that only in a function call? Like you can't just like strew through
Right.
elsewhere?
It's a special syntax that is handled in what it thinks is a function call.
Okay. Are treated as inline SQL keywords to be used instead of comma between arguments or in front of arguments such as trim. I see. So this is the column here. It's actually the last thing in the function.
Yeah.
I have found it is useful to have a standalone call to format where you can feed your data into it and make sure that SQL is right before you use it in the code. Because sometimes, especially like what you said about the extra levels of square brackets, sometimes I don't put enough in.
Yeah.
Okay, so operators are treated as any questions for anyone else? I want to stop and like, is this going well? Or is it fun? Should I read faster, slower? Should I say it's SQL or SQL? So I'm just going to switch back and forth depending on how tired I am. Cool. All right, operators are treated as variadic. except for equals, not equals, which are binary and require exactly 2 operands. Wonder how many I can put in here. Probably just 1, huh?
Probably.
This one kind of, yeah. Okay, so equals plus. Oh, so you can have as many of them as you want. That's cool. It actually brings the very variadic nature of closures plus to the SQL.
And if you're using the quoted symbol form, then you'd have paren equals without the colon.
Or without the.
And you can't do it in the CLJS one, I don't think. Oh, maybe you can. Well, there you go.
Almost looks like a function call if you squint.
Yep.
Now count star. Oh yes, this is all the time. Too many times, actually, probably. With a parameter of 0, the nil value is inlined as null. Oh, is not null. I see it there. Inline is a special example of a special syntax, and it renders its single argument as part of the SQL string generated by format. So going inline. Oh, okay. Ah, so no question mark no parameter extracting because it's inline.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do like you can't. Oh, that's what I've used before is raw. There you go. I was like, how
Yeah.
do you put it in without the quoting? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh, and I
raw
bet you
is a
mentioned it, like-
string that produces raw SQL, and inline is a, in theory, converted to SQL value inlined.
Let's see, renders it as single argument as part of the string generated by format. Another form of special syntax is treated as function calls as keywords or symbols that begin with %. Such symbols are split at dot and turned to function calls. Oh, look at that. That's cool. So that as opposed to this with the brackets. So that is definitely
It's a shorthand that
So-
works for simple function calls.
yeah, and I guess symbols can have %, like that's a valid symbol.
Mhm.
So
And a colon
Colon?
can go in
Oh,
front of
gotcha.
that. So yeah, it can be a keyword or a symbol.
huh. That's cool. That's good because sometimes if you do want to do select, oops, select. You want to do select star, you got to go or count star like that. The 3 levels of
Right, yeah. And if you use the % version, then you can drop one of the parentheses.
the editor's trying to be too smart. I can't. Let's just start from the beginning. Select. So you go % count star. Okay.
Yeah.
And oops. So you can't take one more level off that?
No, because it's still a function call, otherwise it would become well, no, because it has to recognize it as a
Oh.
function. Oh, you can. Okay. Yes. My bad.
That's
Yep.
very cool, because then that takes away
Yeah.
2 levels of brackets. I
Yes.
will be using that. That's awesome. The lion's share of my function syntax is the simple ones. I do
Ah,
have some that are like to char to like truncate a date down, or those I'm fine making fancy, but for simple ones that's really good. Max, yeah. Very cool.
I guess
So
the
if you
downside
want,
to that is like, unlike the other one, that's not really manipulable as data, right? Because like everything's just like packed together, like dot separated stuff.
right. Yeah. You can only give simple named arguments in the percent form.
Right. So it has to
Yeah.
be kind of like, it's static, and like it's not gonna change at all between usages where you'd have to build it up programmatically. Or
Well,
you
yeah,
just
you can only
swap it
use it with
entirely
things
for
like
like a
common,
different one.
yeah, you can only use it with basic column names and things like that. I'm not sure if you can put numbers in there. I haven't tried that. So if you did
like,
count.1, oh, well, there you go. So you can probably use anything that simply works as a string, I suspect. So there's an unsupported feature, an
so
undocumented feature, let's say.
yeah, but we couldn't like, so in this, so but we couldn't do like, we want to do count f.foo. We couldn't do f.foo
But you could do
because it makes it
f/foo.
too. Oh. Oh, okay. Well, that right there is that's quite a special symbol. Clojure gives you plenty of rope to hang yourself. Oh yeah, here you go, right here. A long-standing
Yeah.
tradition in this meetup to be experimenting with something and stumble upon something that's a paragraph down. Okay, so we got that. So the latter syntax can be convenient in a select because A colon B is otherwise taken as a column and it's alias. So selecting a function call expression requires an extra level of nesting, right? Like this. A, B.
Oh, and in fact, we do show that the percent form lets you omit both levels of brackets there. And then you can do it with an alias as well.
Oh yeah, here you go. Yeah. Although I think we can take the bracket out of these two, right?
You can take the bracket out of that middle one. So you can't take the brackets off that because it's an alias, but you can take the brackets off that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But
it'll
not
still
that one.
work.
The alias is what throws that one off, which is that's fine. I mean, that's another.
Yeah.
Having the alias, like the tuple as an alias, that makes a lot of sense. Was the 1.x to 2.x, was the syntax largely the same?
The syntax of the DSL is largely the same. There were some things that I had to change in order to accommodate some of the extensions. One of the main things is essentially in the 2.x, anytime you see a vector, it's going to be an expression outside of the sort of the select with aliases thing. Vectors and expressions are always function calls, and that wasn't true of 1.x. So
Oh.
there were certain syntaxes it was really hard to represent. So 2.0 tries to be much, much more consistent about how it applies the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm taking a bunch of notes here, so this is all very helpful to me because I'm making notes about things in the documentation that need to change.
Oh, cool. All right, SQL parameters. As indicated in the preceding sections, values found in the DSL data structure that are not keywords or symbols are listed out as positional parameters. By default, they are replaced by question mark in the generate SQL and added to the parameter list order. If you specify number true, the numbered placeholders will be used instead of the positional ones. HoneySQL also supports name parameters. Oh. There are two ways of specifying a name parameter: a keyword or symbol that begins with a question mark, and the param special function syntax. Okay. So that just gives it a name. So it's easier to see what the name is.
Yeah, and the web app by default has params called param1 and param2.
Oh, I see it there. Okay, so this is the. So if I do question mark param1.
Yep.
So that would be as opposed to saying Java like that.
Yeah. And this becomes
Okay.
very useful if you're using the quoted symbolic form that looks a bit like data log, because it's quoted, so there's no evaluation, so there's no values floating around to be lifted out as parameters.
Okay. Okay, so we have, and then param x. So param's like a function call-ish thing.
Yeah, bit of special syntax.
Or with numbered true. So this is just the same thing, but with numbered. Are there certain databases that require this, or is that
It's something, where was it I ran into? There is something specific that does require it, and I can't remember what it is.
okay.
But it's something that not all databases provide, but a lot of Postgres people prefer to use numbered parameters. So I've been told. And there was definitely one database that it was a problem. Oh, it was the node driver. Someone was using HoneySQL to generate SQL for node on the server using whichever database driver, and that only supported numbered parameters.
It was like a Clojure script on the back end kind of a thing. Or in
Yeah.
Node. It was in
Yeah.
Node.
I mean,
all right, functional helpers. In addition to the hash map and sequence approach of building SQL queries with raw Clojure data structures, there's a namespace full of helper functions also available. These functions are generally variadic and threadable.
and now you're going to have to switch to an actual REPL because I'm pretty sure the web app doesn't support this.
Let's see.
Just before we continue on the helpers part, so the one above with the params thing, was all of that was the same when using symbols? Is that right? Or
right, when you're using the symbolic form, and so it's quoted, then you can use question mark X, and it will look it up in the params map in the formatting, because you can't have the embedded values in the symbolic form. Whereas you can have them in the DSL form with the keywords because that's evaluated, and vectors and keywords evaluate to themselves.
right, okay.
And there is actually a feature which is documented somewhere, not very much, that does let you use the symbolic form with substitution variables in it. And it uses the Clojure template thing. So
Let's see here. Oh. Let's see here. Let's do. I want to try the symbolic one. See what it looks like. So there's this upper one. Okay. So then the symbolic one would be and then no colons. And
nice.
then this has got to be, wait, I guess it has to have these
The
two
param,
colons.
actually, the param should work like that. But that one should have a colon, yeah, because it's. Ooh, I don't know if that'll work with a quoted argument.
That
No,
wouldn't
missing
work.
parameter, it doesn't. Okay. And so the X will also have to be a colon. There we go.
Is this, should I make this question mark X?
Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
Did the param form not work?
I don't think so. The param X like that
Yeah.
had missing parameter for value for X.
Oh. Okay. Okay, then I would consider that a bug. Thank you.
I like the question mark. It makes it feel very much like data log. Okay. Interesting. Okay, let's go on to functional helpers. Let's get this whole thing in here. Okay. So select t.id and name as table. So there's no outer,
Right, because they're
like this
variadic,
one.
so you don't need the outer sequence.
The args is the outer
Mhm.
sequence.
Yeah.
Table T where ID equals. So if you use these ones, it's a lot more. There's one layer of brackets missing.
Yeah. And the nice thing with this is that you can programmatically build fragments a lot more easily.
That. Right. So we can take this one. Can we just okay, yeah, we can get the the format out of it. And we say where let's see, bar 1, 2, 3. Oh, forgot my SQL format. Where ID equals question mark and bar in. There is a helper function for every single clause that HoneySQL provides out of the box. In addition, there are helpers for composite, lateral, over, and upsert that make it easier to construct those parts of the SQL DSL. Examples of composite appear in the README. Examples over in the clause reference. I don't know, what's composite? I don't know that I've ever done composite stuff before.
It's essentially tuple types.
Interesting. Ooh, pretty true.
Or where it puts, yeah. But you actually have to print it to get it on multiple lines.
Okay. All right. In general, helper foo expression will produce helper foo expression, with a few exceptions. See the doc string for details, yes. In addition to being variadic, which often lets you omit one level of bracket, the helper functions merge clauses, which can make it easier to build queries programmatically. Oh yeah, you got the selector twice.
Mm-hmm.
You want to replace it. Oh. If you want to replace it, you use the fact that you're in Clojure to do that.
It's just data.
Helpers always use keywords when constructing clauses, so you can rely on using keywords into search. The following helper functions in Clojure core. Filter for group by. Yeah. Okay. So be careful. HoneySQL DDL. HoneySQL 1 did not support any DDL statements. It's fairly common for people to use the HoneySQL Postgres library to get DDL support, even if they didn't need the Postgres functions. Library did not work with HoneySQL 2, but all the functionality from it has been incorporated into HoneySQL now and described in the Postgres section. See also the DDL clauses, the clause reference for documentation about supported DDL. So this is, this is altering or creating tables or adding the index. Yeah. Almost all of my experience with Honey has been selects.
Mhm.
Haven't even hardly done any inserts or deletes or anything like that. Okay, maybe we'll hop over to that soon. Dialects. HoneySQL operates in ANSI SQL mode, but it also supports a lot of PostgreSQL extensions in that mode. PostgreSQL is mostly a superset of ANSI SQL, so it makes sense to support as much as possible of the union between those two out of the box. Dialects supported are ANSI, SQL Server, MySQL, NRQL. Oh yes, I Thank you very much for that. I was using that today. And Oracle. The most visible difference between the dialects is how SQL entities should be quoted if the quoted true option is provided. Most databases use double quote for quoting. SQL Server uses brackets, and MySQL uses dot dot.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Is it not dot dot?
No, it is back quotes that they just haven't
okay.
appeared in the markdown.
I think they're there. They're just making this. Oh yeah. You need to have the back quotes around the back quotes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Markdown. In addition, the Oracle dialects disables as and aliases. Oh.
Yeah. Because in Oracle, you
Oh.
say select X space Y instead of X as Y.
So can we do, is it dialect?
Mm-hmm.
Oracle?
Yep.
Oh, let me take out the pretty. Oh, wait. Oh, no, this is the quoting.
Yeah. The quoting gives you the quotes.
Yeah, there you go. There's no as. Interesting. I did not know that about Oracle. By default, wow, quoting is off, which produces cleaner looking SQL and assumes you control all the symbols and keywords used as table, column, and function names. That you control all of them, the SQL entities. If you're building in a DDL or SQL where the table, column, or function names should be provided by an external source, you should specify quoted true to ensure all quantity SQL entities are safely quoted. Quoted true.
Yeah, that won't do anything because Oracle is, you've specified a dialect, but if you take the dialect out, then you'll get quoting.
That's without it, and then that's with it.
Yep.
So Oracle turns on the quoting.
Any dialect turns on quoting.
Okay.
And then you can turn quoting on and off because you can set the dialect globally, and then still control whether quoting is on or off.
There you go. Okay. Let's see. If you do not, as of this version 2.3.928, you do not specify quoted as an option, HoneySQL will automatically quote any SQL entities that seem unusual that contain characters that are not alphanumeric or underscore. Purely alphanumeric entities will not be quoted. Well, will not be quoted. Oh, purely ones will not be quoted. You can prevent the auto quoting by explicitly passing quoted false into the format call, but from a security point of view, you should think very carefully before you do that.
So if you were to stick an unusual character into like the table name, you'll see you get quoting on it. Not on the table name, on the column name you will, I think. Oh no, you've got quoted false, so you have to turn the quote and remove the dialect. You'll have to do both. There we go.
Ah, there you go. Good. Extra security. So so in this case, if we said false, we allow the possibility of there being a injection.
There you go. There's your what is it? Tommy drop tables?
Bobby tables? Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Bobby tables. Yeah. So.
Okay, as of 2.4.9.47, you can change the default setting of quoted from nil to true via the set options. Oh, there's
again,
like
you can set it
options.
globally. Yeah.
Okay. You don't have to pass it every time to format.
Yep.
All right. Currently, the only dialect that has substantive differences from the others is MySQL, for which the set clause is different precedence than ANSI SQL. And then see the new NRQL for more details of NRQL dialect. You can change the dialect globally using set dialect by passing in one of the keywords above. You need to call this function before you call format the first time. Change the dialect for a single one by specifying dialect in that call. Alphanumeric SQL entities are not quoted by default, but if you specify the dialect, they will be quoted. That's like you said. If you don't specify a dialect, you can specify quoted true to have them quoted. You can also enable quoting via the set dialect function.
Yeah, there's an optional argument that lets you do that.
You want to use the dialect and set the quoting, specify and set quoted nil. Back to the go back to the automatic. Yeah, I see. Okay, this is what we just. Ooh, look at there's your iffy field. Out of the box, as part of this extended ANSI SQL standard, HoneySQL supports quite a few PostgreSQL extensions. The library which provided PostgreSQL support for HoneySQL 1.0 does not work with 2.x. 2.x includes all the functionality out of the box. See the section on database-specific hints and tips, which may provide ways to satisfy your database's needs without changing the dialect or extending. Reference. Full list of supported SQL clauses is documented in the clause reference. Full list of operators as prefix foreign functions is documented in the operator reference. Best documentation for helper functions is in the HoneySQL helpers namespace. Wow. Okay. More detail about the certain core functionality that can be found in the more detail about the core functionality can be found in the reference documentation. If you're migrating, there's an overview of differences. All right. So we've gotten to the end of the getting started. Where should we go next? How about general?
Mhm.
This section provides more details about specific behavior in HoneySQL and how to generate certain SQL constructs. Entity generation. Entity generation. HoneySQL treats keywords and symbols as SQL entities in any context other than the function call position. If quoting is in effect, either because dialect was specified or because quoted true was specified, the literal name of the unqualified single second keyword or symbol is used as is and quoted. Oh yeah, there's your backticks. If quoting is not in effect, any dashes in the name will be converted to underscores. Oh, I've been using underscores. I can just use dashes.
You
That's
can use
cool.
dashes, yeah. It makes it easier to go from Clojure code to database code if you're using underscores in the database and hyphens in Clojure.
Ah, cool. Because almost all of the database names are going to be underscores because dash is like minus, right? In SQL.
Yeah. I've worked with a lot of databases that have camel case table names and columns.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there a mode that changes this into camel case?
Nope.
No, okay.
Nope.
That's a bridge too far. Okay, I gotcha. If a keyword or symbol contains a dot, it will be split apart and treated as a table or alias name and column name. Okay. Qualified keyword or symbol will also be split apart by dashes in the namespace. A portion will be converted to underscores. Oh, so it's just the dot as opposed to the slash is the difference here. Okay. And they're equivalent.
Right, with this caveat, because it turned out that there were people who needed the difference between table names and column names and hyphens and underscores.
Wait, so what, is there a difference between the outputs?
Yeah. If you do it quoted, the hyphens in the table part still become underscores, but the hyphens in the column names stay as hyphens.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's only with the namespace qualified ones, right? Yeah, the
Right.
dots.
Whereas if you use the dot separated one, it converts both. It's so that you can do both.
Well, the dot separated one doesn't convert.
If you quote it. If you're unquoted,
Oh,
it will convert them to underscores.
so if you just want the table name converted, you should use the slash.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Unquoted. Yeah, it's a very weird edge case that I was like, okay, yeah, sure, I can make
You
that
gotta-
work.
You want to allow people to paint themselves into that corner.
Yeah.
Finally, there's some context where only an SQL entity is accepted rather than an arbitrary expression. So a string can be will also be treated as an SQL entity. And in such cases, this entity name will always be quoted. Dashes will not be converted to underscores, and a slash is not treated as a separating qualifier from the name, regardless of the dialect.
Yeah. And so this is the other option that people needed. And so this lets you use strings in certain situations to get an as is name.
Oh, so that actually carries the slash through.
Yeah.
Several companies ago in our ordering system, my coworker who was there before I started had named the order table order. And so everywhere we had to extra escape it because you would select from order and order, it was a keyword. So we had to keep. Yeah, that was fun.
Yes.
He thought it was clever. Tuples and composite values. Some databases support composite values, which are usually represented as tuples in SQL. Oh, this is the composite one again. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In HoneySQL 1, you could sometimes get away with just using a vector of entities and or values, but it's very much dependent on the context. Version 2.x always treats vectors as function calls, which may be special syntax or a function. And actually, right, may be special syntax or an actual function call.
Mm-hmm.
HoneySQL provides composite of special syntax. So it's like it uses the special syntax to get back into the tuple.
Right.
Okay. Interesting. There's also a composite helper function. All right. So a composite thing you would use it for like a measurement plus a unit kind of a thing, or
I guess so. I've never had to use composite types in SQL, but I think Postgres people use them quite a bit.
has anyone else used composite?
Oh, Tyson is nodding.
Hopefully he's unmuting soon so he can tell us about it. All right. All right, working with JSON and JSONB. This is increasingly common for Postgres users. This is very true of me and my company to be working with JSON columns in the databases. PostgreSQL has really good support for JSON types. When using HoneySQL to generate SQL that manipulates JSON, you need to be careful because it is common to use regular Clojure data structures to represent the JSON and rely on protocol extensions for the libraries to handle automatic conversion.
Mm-hmm.
I only learned about this a couple weeks ago because I actually had to convert code that used the old Clojure Java JDBC to Next JDBC. And
Okay.
the facilities are the same, but they're just like some of the class names are, the protocol names are
Yes.
different.
Protocols.
I
Yeah.
just had to.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they're all there. I just had to change names. So this allows you to say like, set this JSONB column to this Clojure map, and it gets converted into JSON on the way in, and then on the way out, it gets converted back into the Eden, as if by magic.
Yeah. And I didn't write any of that. It was contributed by Postgres users who are using JSON and JSONB. So it's real live experience of Postgres.
HoneySQL also uses Clojure data structures to represent function calls and SQL statements. So if you are also using Clojure data structures for your JSON, you need to tell HoneySQL not to interpret those values. There are two possible approaches. Use name parameters, okay, instead of having the values directly in and then have it on the outside as part of the options call to format, or use lift wrapped around any structured values, which tells HoneySQL not to interpret the vector or hash map value as a DSL. So lift, and you have to put JSON in there.
You can put EDN, but I mean the assumption is that you've got a data structure that you do not want interpreted as HoneySQL DSL. So in the where clause, instead of equals ID1, you might want some sort of map. And if you try doing that, it'll either fail or it'll treat it as a DSL. And if you wrap it in lift, in fact, there you go. Yeah. And it even says you might need lift. And then you get the parameter is the actual value itself, and it just assumes that it'll be converted when you feed it to a JDBC library.
Gotcha.
What was the other thing we saw earlier? There was like raw, and was there like a third one?
There's inline, raw,
Inline.
and lift. Yeah.
And inline would just write that exact thing there.
It would try and convert it to SQL, and it probably wouldn't know how with a data structure, but it would do its best to try and convert it to something directly inside the SQL.
Okay. Whereas lift is going to put the question mark and then like pull out the value exactly as it was written.
Yeah, it's going to assume that whatever this data structure is, it shouldn't try and interpret it, and it will just treat it as a parameter. So it lifts it out as a parameter rather than trying to evaluate it.
And then raw just inserts it without quoting.
Yeah. So it assumes that what you're giving it is actual SQL.
A SQL fragment.
And so it's to provide an escape hatch where you can't generate certain things, which are fairly rare these days.
I use it sometimes where I've finally figured out how to get the SQL to look correct, and I wanted to put that snippet in, but don't want to take the time to because almost all of my HoneySQL experience right now, we use it a little bit in actual production, but for the most part, mine is exploratory. And so I have all kinds of different levels of HoneySQL usage, and so I want to use the alias or the helper functions, but so I just want to be like, oh, where, and then this funky function call that I finally figured out, especially when it comes to like selecting on a part of a JSON document, like filling into the keys with the arrows or the greater thans. That one is often just use raw.
They all exist in there's a PG ops namespace that lets you bring them in. Most of them can be done directly. Some of them actually need symbolic names. But this basically brings in all of the weirdly named operators.
Cool. All I will use. I did not know that existed. That's great. So this, because this is like this is a helper that adds that, or is this the?
Yeah, they're symbols that
here.
convert to the keyword that's underneath, because not all the keywords are representable. For example, question mark ampersand. You can't represent that as a keyword or a symbol because ampersand is special, I think. Is that one of the good examples? Maybe not. No, because it's actually written here. But the at greater than, that's it. The at symbol can't. So there you go. You've got at greater than, at question mark, at. And so those have to be symbol names that resolve to an underlying keyword that is constructed with a keyword function rather than colon at, which isn't legal.
Gotcha. Okay.
But in theory, I think all of the weirdly named PG ops exist, and you can use them to build functional expressions, and they all work as special syntax.
So you can put this in like.
Yeah, and that'll actually resolve as it resolves as a function, but if you load that namespace in,
Oh, I gotta load that one.
yeah,
I gotta opt into the complexity.
yes. honey.sql.pg-ops. You don't need to, yeah, just that alone, evaluate that, and now reevaluate your points to thing.
Hey, oh, that's
There we go.
great.
There we go.
I've used raw for that, and that's cool. Interesting. So it just adds like I'm always interested in these like side effect only namespaces
Mhm.
where you import it and then it makes something else behave differently. I'll have to look at the code.
Yeah, the first paragraph of the namespace docstring says that it registers all of the operators. So it has a whole bunch of register op calls in it, I think.
Using the extensibility for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Splendid. That's cool. Okay, let's see here. We lifted, now it's on to caching. As of 22858, format can cache the SQL and parameters produced from the data structure so that it does not have to be computed on every call. This functionality is only available in Clojure and depends on core cache, being on your class path.
Mm-hmm.
If you're repeatedly building the same complex SQL statements over and over again, this can be a good way to provide a performance boost, but there are some caveats. As always with caching, right? You need core cache the dependency. You need to create one or more caches yourself from the various cache wrap. Yes. You should use named parameters in your SQL DSL structure and pass the actual parameters via params. Oh, I see. So then that keeps it the same input.
Right. Yes, because otherwise the values will be fed into the cache key, which you don't want.
Then you can pass the atom containing the cache to format using the cache option. Call the format looks in the cache for a match with the data structure passed in. The entire data structure is used as the key, including any literal parameter values. If the cache maintains a match, the corresponding vector of SQL string and parameters is used. Otherwise, the data structure is parsed as usual, and the SQL string and parameters generated from it and stored in the cache for the next call. Finally, the name parameters in the vector are replaced by their values from the params option.
So it can shave off quite a bit of time if you have very complex statements.
And a lot of them, like a lot of. So I assume you use HoneySQL in your applications.
Yes, we don't actually cache anything. We don't use the caching functionality. But there were people complaining that the parsing from the data structure to the string was too slow. And so this was added as a way of providing them with the performance boost. And it's when you run the tests, it does actually do some tests on different types of data structures and caching, and prints out some of the timings. So it can be substantial. If you've got very complicated DSL expressions and you're reparsing them over and over again, then this can actually be quite a big benefit.
Makes sense. Yeah, I can see. Yeah, I can see that as a benefit. It's interesting. I feel like this library is probably of a lot of Clojure code. It's probably the most pure, like a most largely pure code base, because it's just transforming from one thing to another. It's not actually doing any database connections or side effects.
Yeah, there's very, very little state inside the library.
Yeah.
A bit of a tangent, but I'm just curious, how do you go about writing that logic in HoneySQL? Like, I assume, like you're saying here, that it accepts any Clojure core wrapped caches, but you're not forcing Clojure cache on anybody as a transitive dependency, right?
No.
So how does that work? Like, you just have the dependency while you're building it, but then it's not in the exported thing. So like, as long as those functions don't get called, nothing blows up.
Right. So if you specify the cache option, it will try and use Clojure core cached. Clojure core cache, and it will complain if you don't have it on the class path. So in fact, since you don't have it on your class path, Nate, you want to go ahead and stick cache and do atom of an empty hash map and see what happens.
Yeah, I ask because I'm used to, like, in Maven on Java projects, you can specify the dependencies are provided, I think it is, or something like that, where you're sort of saying, like, you as the user of my framework or library or whatever have to include this. So like, I have it for my development, but it's not in like the bundled jar or whatever. But I'm not familiar enough with like building a Clojure project. Like, how do you do that equivalent? I guess there is some way of doing an equivalent of that, which is what you did here, right?
I'll post a link to the source into the chat. It basically dynamically requires Clojure core cache. And so it has a try catch and will fail if you don't have it on the class path. And that's how it can say, oh, you need to add this to your class path. So if you search, in fact, there you go. There it is, through ops. So it tries to require Clojure core cache wrapped. And if that fails, it gives you the error message. And if it works, it implements the function.
Cache queries are not supporting Clojure.
So when you're working on HoneySQL, you just have an alias that includes it as a dependency, basically?
Yeah, in the test dependency. So if you look in the project, you'll see that the deps EDN file for it has a test alias, and Clojure core cache is on that.
Gotcha. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, deps EDN down the bottom.
Come on. Wow. Quite a depth ADN file you got there, Sean.
Yeah, because it does all of the documentation, runs through, all the examples in the documentation are executed as tests. So it has a lot of options to do it both for ClojureScript and for Clojure. And it runs all of the examples in the docs through both,
So it runs,
and multi-version tests them.
This has to generate, wait.
So some of them have a little flag in that says ignore this for testing, but most of them that you see will test that the function call produces the REPL output as shown.
Like this. This is an example of that.
Yep,
like
that's
arrow.
test. Yeah.
Fantastic. What library is the one that does that while we're in the rabbit hole?
In the rabbit hole, it is Lee Reed's test doc blocks.
That's doc blocks. Nice.
Which is a wonderful library.
HoneyGen. So there's a namespace here somewhere. Is it in here?
And so there you'll see you can do multi-version testing on the documentation as well as multi-version testing on the code.
Very cool. Wow. Cool. Any other, is that, are you any other questions, Jason? Is that far enough?
I think that kind of answered it, but so that's a def, right? Through ops. So doesn't that evaluate right away?
I'm not sure what you're asking of Claude.
Sorry, the code that you shared with me.
Right,
That
which
was
doesn't
like-
require.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it's a dynamic require. So it will fail at runtime if that namespace can't be loaded.
right. But when does that happen? Like, isn't that a def? So isn't that def gonna just like execute as soon as the
No, the
SQL?
deps is purely declarative. So if you have core cache on your list of deps, the require will succeed.
Sorry, I mean, like this is a def.
Yeah, over
Def
here, this
through
def through
ops.
ops.
Yeah.
So isn't that going to run as soon as the SQL namespace is loaded?
Right. Yes. So either core cached is on your class path or it isn't. So
Right.
when you load this namespace, if
Oh,
it is on the
okay.
class path, then you'll get caching behavior. And if it's not on the class path, the function will fail. So that's
Well, it won't fail on load, but on if it fails to load, the function, this def will be defined as a function that all it does is throw.
that's
the
right.
exception.
Yes,
Okay.
sorry.
I
Yes,
get it.
yeah.
Okay.
The catch returns the function definition. Yes.
Got
So
it,
it
got
defers the execution into the function, but it does the requiring at load time. So,
Okay.
so for example, if you then
That
decided,
makes
oh, I should add Clojure core cache to my deps EDN file and then run Clojure 1.12 sync deps, which will then load it into your project, you'd have to reload Clojure.sql, honey.sql, so that it would know that that was available and it would redefine through ops.
Right. Okay.
Ah, that's, I was wondering. So HoneySQL 1 has different namespaces than HoneySQL 2.
Yes.
Is that
It
so
has
someone can use both?
It indeed, yes. We
Ah.
migrated slowly at work. It uses a different group artifact ID and it uses different namespaces. So you can actually have both library versions on your class path and they don't conflict.
Perfect example of Clojure's mentality of accretion only. Like,
Yep.
you can use two different versions of the same library.
It took us years to fully migrate from HoneySQL 1 to HoneySQL 2.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so that, any other questions? I don't want to go away before, if you have any other thoughts.
Nope, we're good. Thanks for explaining that.
Let's see. We were in the middle of caching here.
Mhm.
The code that builds the DSL data structure will be run in all cases, so any conditional logic and helper functions will still happen, since that is how the data structure is created and passed to format.
Mhm. So if you're conditionally building the DSL, that code will still run to produce the DSL, and then format will get the
Oh.
DSL and look it up in the cache and go, oh, I've seen this before, here's the SQL. Otherwise, it will say, oh, I'm going to have to walk this entire DSL to generate the SQL.
So like if format here is caching, this where is called every time. Like the function that adds to the data structure. That's called every
Correct.
time. It can't cache
Yes.
outside of, yeah, that makes
Right.
sense.
So once you're inside the SQL format call, what you pass into that can be cached.
Only at the format level.
So if
You
you're
wanna
conditionally building stuff, and you produce, say, 3 different SQL statements in different situations, those 3 will be cached. And then it won't do the generation of SQL for those 3 things because they're different.
Gotcha, makes sense. You want to avoid that overhead, you'll need to take steps to build this data structure separately and store it somewhere for reuse in the call to format.
Yep.
Do your own caching, essentially.
Yep. If the building of the data structure is expensive enough that it matters.
Yeah. Since the data structure is used as the key in the cache, literal parameter values will lead to different keys. Yes, this is. Since it accepts any of the core Clojure core cache wrap caches and runs your data structure, runs every data structure to the provided cache. It's up to you to ensure that your cache is appropriate for that usage. A basic cache will keep every entry until the cache is explicitly emptied. TTL cache will keep each entry for a specific amount of time, and so on. In expressions are inlined. You cannot cache SQL that includes them. So try to format a statement that includes in when you provide it. So if you try to format a statement that includes an in expression, so ins are
When you've got caching as well. And you can't do this until you, yeah, okay.
that's a weird that's a weird place to
Because
put
you,
that.
yeah. Okay, well, you've got the in bar as well, so.
Oh yeah, that's the one. Don't need that. So in bar.
Yeah.
So
So
this
it
is
actually inlines the parameters because it dynamically has to figure out how many elements are in the data structure you're passing in. Now, there's ways around that in some databases because Postgres, for example, will let you say in a single parameter, and then you can give it an array, and that will work. And I think with Next JDBC, you actually have to kind of hint it as an array. You have to use the Next JDBC types namespace and say as array, but you can make that work.
Cool. Other sections. Add new sections. Okay. Well, we're getting really close to the end of time. What is the weirdest, like, do you have any weird stories of things you've had to support?
Oh gosh, I'd have to go digging through the
Digging through the
history.
issues.
Yeah, all the issues. I mean, yeah, there's yeah. What I will do is just to show you some of the conditional building with the helpers, which I'd like to not be recorded.
Okay. We can wait till
So if
after.
you don't mind turning the recording off, I will share screen.
All right. Well, before you do that, let's
Sure.
just say goodbye for everyone on YouTube. Have a great month. All right.
Good point. I'd forgotten about the YouTube
Thank you,
folks.
Sean. Yes. Thank you.